This video is to demonstrate how to post charges, payments, and adjustments to the patient's ledger using SimChart for the medical office. You will see the screen shows us in the EHR exercises for our administrative homework assignments from the MOP textbook and our simulations. This is not for our numeric assignments. However, this video will demonstrate how to complete those ledgers, entries, or charges for the patients the same way. You will default when you enter into the EHR to your calendar screen. Once your super bills have been completed, since this is a true coding and billing exercise and transaction, you can simply go straight to coding and billing. This will open up your coding and billing options available within your SimChart for the medical office. It will default on super bills. Our previous video demonstrated how to code and complete out our super bills for our patients in our database. This video will be for our patient ledgers or the patient's billing account. So therefore we need to click on ledger. This has opened the patient that I was working on previously. If I need to select a different patient, I simply click on change patient or make sure that I do not have any patient's charts open in my clinical setting. So when I go to coding and I click on ledger, I should have my patient database. I can enter the first couple letters of my patient's last name in the search box and click go. If it is visible from this screen, I can simply click the radio dial. I can use my first, previous, 1, 2, 3, next, last options that will scroll through and jump me around in my patient database. And then confirm the correct patient. Click on the radio dial. Notice the orange button is now selected or available to select. Click on select, and it will open up a condensed version of the patient ledger. Notice across the top in the blue band, you will see the ledger for the guarantor. This is the responsible party that you entered when you were entering your patient's demographics and insurance information at the check-in and pre-registration process. This is the responsible party. Notice this says Father Test. The patient is listed in this gray bar that says Patient Test, but I don't have any lines or boxes for entries as we viewed and demonstrated within our textbook and our classroom hands-on manual exercise. You do have your telephone number, address. Here is your patient's account number as well as the patient's date of birth. In order to see the patient's ledger columns and rows, you will need to click on this little gray triangle or chevron that is to the right of your patient's name. When you do that, it will drop down the transaction lines. Remember, our classroom guidelines and policies require every transaction, whether it is a service, an insurance payment, a patient's copay, or an adjustment amount, must be entered on separate lines. SimChart does require certain items to be entered on every line. So we will look at those in some of those stipulations. If there is no entries previously been made. I've already entered one for this particular patient from a previous super bill and exercise. That you will see any previous ones entered here. If this is not the correct transaction and we need to do an additional one, or I have a new date of service and super bill, we simply will continue to click add row, add row, add row each time and for each transaction or line of entry. So, first things first, your transaction date. This should be the date that you are completing or entering this transaction. So for me, it will be today's date of service. Your actual date of service for the encounter. Many of your homework assignments that you have currently, say the 11th or the 12th, as we move throughout this semester, they will move into the 19th, whatever that date of service is. Click on your calendar. You will then select the appropriate date of service. You will select the provider that is performing that service. It may be different providers, it may be different nurses ultimately, or nurse practitioners. Ultimately, it is whatever provider is signing off on the chart entries and progress notes who has made this assessment and has said to bill for the services. Under your service column, these columns are a little different order from your manual ledger that was provided in your print packet, but they are still the same column types and information. The biggest difference that you will see is this has a transaction date separate from your date of service. That may be the only difference that I can currently think of in comparison to your manual ledgers. Remember, the ledger is the electronic or office copy of that patient's transactions and services provided within that office. For billing purposes, that can be audited by both your insurance companies as well as the IRS. Your service is your procedure. This does not require a written description like our manual ledger does, because we're simply entering the procedure code, and if we needed more detail, then we could push our EHR, could push out when it actually printed a statement that would give a description of this service code. We as medical professionals should be able and have access to identify what these codes are without our description. If it was going to the patient, then that patient would need they would not get a copy of the ledger, they would get a written or printed patient statement that would give them the description instead of the code, or some practice management systems, PMS systems, will actually provide both the code and the description. So that is specialized from practice to practice, EHR to EHR, superbill to superbill. These codes, both in your EHR and on your superbills, on your fee schedules, as these codes change and update yearly, then they have to be updated on all of your forms and in all of your computer systems. So once we've selected our provider that has performed the service, that's also a different column than what you have in your manual ledger. We have to enter the actual service. Currently, you should be given your procedure codes on your superbill and on that fee schedule so that you can just manually come in and type in whatever procedure code that your doctor has provided you. As we move in and become more advanced and are doing these a little more solo, you also can click on a drop down to take that back out. Drop down on, and it will give you, when we get to our payments, you'll notice you have insurance payment, patient payment credit card, patient payment check, patient payment cash, patient refund, as well as a workers' compensation payment. So if it is not an actual procedure, because it is a asterisked item, you have to have an entry. So you're either going to enter a procedure code, manually. When I show you how to code out, I will show you how to obtain that code if you've not been given it, using your coding procedures and techniques. So if we have a charge of $149, remember, payments and adjustments have to be made on separate lines. So if the patient made a payment, I do not do anything further in these boxes per our classroom and office policy. You may be in an office that lets you and wants you to do them all on the same line. That will be up to your office. We will not do it in our classroom for educational and policy teaching purposes. It has defaulted your zeros in each of these boxes. You can see as soon as I clicked in payment, it has pulled down what my current balance is for each one of these, even though there's nothing in there. So right now, 000, notice it's just pulling down that reoccurring balance until either I enter payments or I enter adjustments. So there should not be any insurance payments, and as you can see, it allows us to show different payment options, which is why I prefer having them separate transactions. So in this case, we would still enter our 00, 00. Balance is already calculated for you. This should match what is in your manual ledgers. We'll come down. It is still October 1st. If the date of service is still the 12th, it is still Dr. Walden. If we're doing that EKG we did on our previous exam, enter your procedure code, enter your charges. Notice my running balance has changed and continues to add up all of my charges. Well, my patient paid a copay. My transaction date is still the same. You would traditionally not have a transaction date that is earlier than your actual date of service, but for demonstration purposes, just make sure you're putting in the appropriate information. She made a payment on the same day. Click the date of service that this payment is to be applied to. Provider does not have to be entered. So this is the one time you can leave it blank. However, if she saw Dr. Walden for all of those, you can still click it. This is where you will have to use your drop down and say, is this a patient payment that was made with a credit card, a check? Now your manual ledgers allow you to enter a type of credit card, whether it's Visa, whether it's MasterCard, your check numbers. So just be aware, I know you cannot do that in here. In your manual ledgers that you're doing handwritten, you do have to still provide that check number. You still have to state if it's an insurance payment, you have to tell me the name of the insurance company as well as the check number that the payment is made with. In this particular case, we'll say the patient paid with a check. There's not any charges because it is a payment. There was a payment of $10. Notice my balance dropped $10. There was not an adjustment. We would come back in, and this just continues, and as you get done, you would hit save. Later down the road, after we filed our claim, and we've put all this information on a claim form, we'll come back to the same screen and we'll click Claim and enter and complete a claim form. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to skip that process at this time. That will be on a separate video and show you how you would come back right back in. So we come in at a later date. We search for our patient. We go to Ledger. We hit Select. Notice we still have that outstanding balance of $247. This would be the previous balance on her next, or that patient's next visit if it's their responsibility. We click our little arrow to open up our ledger. Today's a new day. We've got an insurance payment that came in this afternoon. So I'm going to add row. Put the date that I'm entering my transaction. The date of service that insurance is paying. So I've received a payment for date of service 10/11. So I need to go click on 10/11. It lets me know what date of service this payment is for. The provider that it is paying. Now, I do not want to re-enter the procedure code because that is saying that this transaction is posting charges or procedures. I'm not. I'm posting an insurance payment. So I need to click on insurance payment, INSPYMT. I cannot enter my check or the type of insurance, but you do need to do that on your manual ledgers. There's not any charges. This is an insurance payment. So if they made a payment, then say the payment was for $200, and of that, well, 211 wasn't a $200, so I apologize. Let's make this more realistic. My date of service for 211 or 10/11 was only for $70. So they're paying $50. They are adjusting off $10. Now, we want the transactions to be separate if at all possible. So this is where we would come in. Notice I've dropped $50. I'm going to do an add row, 10/1, 10/11, Walden, insurance payment, zero charge. In this case, it's zero payment because all I'm doing is entering my adjustment amount of $10. Notice I've come down. If they've paid $50 of 70, they've wrote off $10 of 70, and they say the patient now owes me $10, or the remaining amount would be to the patient, there is not a place on this particular ledger or EHR practice management system to specify that they've rolled that additional $10 to that patient. It would just be a remaining balance once we receive payment for our 10/12 date of service. That is all there is to posting charges, adjustments, and payments to our ledger. So our 10/11 now has been taken care of. So there should be a $10 outstanding balance if you were to do the math for 10/11, $50 payment, 10/11, $10 adjustment out of 70 means we should have a patient balance left of $10. We receive an insurance payment from our 10/12, put in our transaction date, put in our date of service that the payment is for. So we have $149.38, and then the patient paid their $10 copay. So in this particular case, if the insurance paid, it's another insurance payment. Charges are 0. Payment, $140. We're writing off $9. We still have a $38 balance that we need to worry about. Put in our transaction date, which is today, or whatever day I'm entering. The date of service is still 10/12. The provider, insurance payment, charges are 0. This was a non-covered service, and we are adjusting off the entire $38. Now, in the real world, you would have much more explanation to document all of this information. So notice how our balances keep coming down. Now, in our adjustments, when you are doing an adjustment, and I just noticed that, this particular system requires you to put the negative in front of it to actually subtract your adjustments. So with that being said, we have our insurance payment of $10 that we adjusted off, that $50, the patient copay. So if we were to go back and double check our math, you want to make sure, because it should still be coming down. If my balance was $197 and then we adjusted off that money, then that means out of that outstanding balance, it should come down another $10. Without that negative sign in your adjustment column, you'll notice my balance goes back up to 97 to 207. So you have to make sure that you're taking off and you put that negative in the adjustment column. Notice you did not have to do that in your payment column. The reason you have to put the negative sign in the adjustment column is because if I have a patient, so this patient, when she paid on the 12th, she paid by check. For example, if this patient, we get notice from the bank that this check bounced, I need to be able to go back in. I'm going to add a row, and I now need to say, hey, I got notice that on her patient payment way back here on 10/12, when she saw Walden, that this was an NSF, a non-sufficient funds, that I need to roll this back to my patient. So with that being said, there are certain codes, and you can type in this box. You do not have to use your drop down and preset. So just like we typed in here our procedure codes, if I had a description that I needed to add NSF charge and I need to put back that money, then that's why this adjustment column, instead of having to put a negative, because now I need to adjust her balance and put that $10 bounce check amount back, or I need to apply her bounce check fees. See, now I've added that back, as well as I need to go in and take that copay credit I gave her and put it back, because she now owes that copay that bounced, as well as my non-sufficient funds or bounce check charge. So now this is copay adjustment, and your offices may call it something different. Copay recharge, I'm not sure how you want to call it. We had it where we could just negate that payment for an NSF fee. So your office may want to just simply just come up here under payment and put you a negative sign. It won't let you. So you wouldn't be able to do it that way. Some offices and systems will. So in this case, we have our zero charge, zero payment. I need to add her $10 back in. You do not want to click and just delete it, because this payment right here shows and supports the transaction that we have a non-sufficient fund, and why we are rolling her copay back to her. And now this says she owes for that $10 bounce check, as well as her any additional charges and adjustments that we had to make. So that is why in your adjustment column, you have to put a negative sign to make your balance come down. So be very watchful and careful of that if it is an adjustment that we need to take off of the balance or total amount due, that you have to put a negative sign in front of it. If it is an adjustment that we are needing to add on, or a correction, say we didn't add the correct amount when we entered our transaction the first time, then we may need to go in and show that correction down here on a separate transaction. So this is how you enter your ledger transactions: posting charges, posting your payments, posting any adjustments, whether they are debits or credits to our total balances. And notice down at the bottom, we now have a total ledger balance. So this would be our patient's previous balance that we would enter on the top of their manual super bill, or on the electronic super bill in the previous balance amount when they come in for their next visit. Once you have double checked everything to make sure that you have a separate line transaction for each, you have zeros and payments and negatives and everything in there the way it needs to be done, you click Save, and you have finished updating that patient's patient ledger. When you're ready to go to your next patient, you click Change Patient, go pull up your next patient, select them, open up your ledger columns, and you can see this particular patient has other transactions, and they just come straight across. And you would have providers missing, so that would be something we would need to make sure that is completed when we go to submit and complete our claims. And so change patient, select your next patient, open up your ledger, and add a row. You do not want to make a habit of deleting a row, since this is educational. If you entered one by mistake, then you could delete it off. However, it does allow you to edit and change them. So in the real world, you would not be able to delete it off. You would not even be able to truly change it. You would have to do an amendment or an adjustment and show that next line that shows your correction. That concludes how to complete, enter ledger charges, payments, and adjustments for our patients using super bill information